You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to another round of Snarky Faith. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney, and Snarky Faith is radio for the spiritually disenfranchised. If you've had enough of the insanity in Christianity, well, you've come to the right place. Here at Snarky Faith, we're all about finding a sane faith grounded in reality and working to make the world a better place in tangible ways. If you can handle your conversations about faith with copious amounts of
sarcasm
and also a bit of this, then welcome home. We're glad you're here. On today's show, I'm going to be sitting down and having an extended conversation with author Karl Forehand about his new book, Out into the Desert. But before we descend into the snark, just a reminder that this broadcast and all past podcasts can be found at snarkyfaith.com or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Amazon, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube. We're there. We're everywhere. Just look for Snarky Faith. And if you like this show, make sure to share, subscribe, and if you're feeling particularly generous, drop a review over on Apple Podcasts, too. It helps get the word out to new listeners. So this one goes out to the he's, the she's, the they's, the ve's, and everyone in between because, hey, we all love you. And in this show, this hour, what I'm going to do is move us along very quickly, very, very quickly, because we've got lots to chat about with Karl this hour. So, without further ado, I'm going to give you the choicest cuts of Christian nuts, right? It's kind of like the, Reese's Pieces of Christian feces. That's right. It's the Christian Crazy of the Week. And just as crazy as you'd expect.
If loving the Lord is wrong, I don't want to be right.
Lord have mercy. The Lord is my shepherd. He know what I want.
Starting up the top, just a reminder that, hey, people out there in America, guess what? Christians are being persecuted. I know. It's surprising. White male Christians are being persecuted. Why? Why? Oh, why could that be happening? I'm not sure, but you know what? Oh, one of our OG grifters, Kenneth Copeland's got an idea, and it somehow has to do with the amount of airplanes that you own. So, a real man of the people, Kenneth Copeland's talking about what does it look like to have persecution in America today?
Nobody cared. Nobody, they could have cared less when this ministry bought its first airplane. It was just a little Cessna Skyline, a little four-seat Skyline, and it was too little when we got it. But then when we wound up with a Citation 10 and a Gulfstream, then they got mad. Why you got a fleet? Yes, I do. I don't own it. The ministry owns it.
Sweet Jesus, are we already talking about dicks, penises, and phalluses already? Like in this episode? Absolutely we are. Nobody cared when we had a tiny little Cessna, but they cared when it got bigger and better. And also because you run a 501c3 nonprofit ministry that you also remind us is that, oh, the ministry's the one that owns all of these things. People are mad about what we own, but don't be mad at me. Be mad at ministry. There's a problem going on. Ministry. Blame ministry. It's what the hell is this? I actually, this would be great advice for the Southern Baptist Convention, because they've recently had a report that's come out about how they tamped down, did not listen to sexual abuse within the denomination. And Kenneth gives us a crystal clear answer here. It's not me. It's the ministry that did all the abuse, all the fucking, and all the assault. So, yeah, we're out the gun. We are distilling the snark down moment by moment because I've got to give you the best before we get our conversations with Karl. So let me give you one more degenerate teat to taste from in the world of pastoring and griftering and, I don't know, just lying and taking advantage of people and taking their money in the name of Jesus. You know, that kind of a thing that we roast week after week. Well, if you're waiting for that, let me give you here. Kent Christmas. Yes, Christmas comes twice a year, but don't tell his wife.
Years ago, there was a certain car I wanted so bad, did not have the money. And I went out of my garage and I visualized where that car was going to sit. And I would come out there and I said, Lord, I thank you for this car. One day I walked out my garage and I didn't have to, by faith, say, Lord, I thank you for this car. I opened the door and got in it because I believed that I had it. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Oh, hallelujah. How about how the fuck you, Kent Christmas? Seriously, this is the way that you're preaching the way that God works? I used to stand alone in my garage and I would just pray for a really nice car and God gave it. There were starving children everywhere, but I needed a Chevy Malibu, damn it. I needed one. So at what point do we descend into coveting for things when we're just naming it and claiming it in the name of Jesus? Because, I've got a house that's got a 4-car garage and there's not 4 cars in it. Lord, where are you? Lord, I'm suffering. Lord. Oh, Lord. So, Lord, lead us to a true man of the people, one crying out in the wilderness, if the wilderness was Tennessee. And we were actually forced to listen to bigoted preacher Greg Locke say Greg Locke kind of things. So, yeah, here's your last bit of Christian crazy, because crazy doesn't get better than Greg Locke.
I'm to the place right now, if you vote Democrat, I don't even want you around this church. You can get out. You can get out, you demon. You can get out, you baby butchering election thief. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. I don't care how mad that makes you. You get pissed off as you want to. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. They are God-denying demons that butcher babies and hate this nation.
One has to wonder, does he bring the same intensity, when he's a pastor to, weddings and funerals? Oh, dearly beloved, we're gathered here today about John and Marcy because we want to make sure they're not demon-loving. Yeah, that kind of a thing. Or, we're gathered here today to remember the memory of dear Jose. And Jose's dead because of demon. Sorry. That was a bunch of craziness. And you got a lot of craziness because guess what? We're going to descend into something interesting, contemplative, and deep. So here we go right now. Today, I have the honor of sitting down with Karl Forehand. Karl is a bivocational pastor for like the past 20 years, has training in spiritual leadership coaching, plant-based nutrition, and spiritual direction. He lives in Missouri with his wife, Laura, and his dog, Winston. He also has 3 grown children and 2 grandchildren. I've seen pictures of them. They're adorable. Karl is also the author of the books like The Tea Shop, The Hotel, Apparent Faith, and Being. And soon, coming up in August, he is releasing his new book, Out into the Desert, that he co-wrote with his wife, Laura. He's also he's the organizer of the Leaning In conference. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today, Karl. But welcome to the show, Karl.
That's why I do lots of things. So if several of them aren't good, maybe something good will come out.
I like it. Now, one thing for those that do know you on social media, you had a big thing happen this year. In January, you had a stroke. And so I've been watching some of your recovery. So tell us about how are you now? How is the process? Give us an update.
Yeah, it kind of came on unexpectedly. I've been pretty healthy. I did some things to change my health when I was 48 or 50 and been pretty healthy for a while. I started working on an assembly line at the beginning of last year and just started noticing some symptoms. And all of a sudden I was in a stroke cycle and finally got to the emergency room. When I got there, I was still walking and my arm worked and everything, but within a few hours after that, just my left side completely didn't work anymore. So it was traumatizing experience, life-changing. I don't recommend it at all.
You don't recommend, but yeah, how are you doing? How's the process been since then, or progress?
Yes, I went almost straight from the hospital to acute rehab, where they taught me how to dress and take a shower, put my shoes on, and all those kind of things. And they also got me up walking right away. So just a few days in the hospital and straight to that acute rehab for a couple of weeks. And then we came home, I had a weekend off, and I went to Kansas City, where I lived during the week with my daughter and my wife for a while. And then she kind of came back to work, but they've been working on me for 10 weeks, like 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it's real important to get on it. So I guess where I am now is I passed my driving test on Monday. So I got my driving privileges back, and I'm really proud of my leg, walking and things like that is way better. My hand is coming back and starting to open up. But it's kind of a hard process to explain, because it's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it's like, what progress did I make in this whole week? And it's going to be just a little bit. But we are making progress, and that's so I'm back home doing therapy at home now and looking to get employed, I hope, before too long, because we've been out of income for a long time, way too long. So
no, but I also think it seems like just even watching you go through the process on social media and just how positive that you have been. I just want to say it's been inspirational to watch that, because I can imagine also on the flip side how frustrating it can be to be able to.
I think we realized in the emergency room, Laura and I kind of looked at each other and just took a deep breath together and said, we're going to do this. And that was overwhelming to say that, because we had no idea what was ahead of us or how hard it was going to be. But I think the other thing we gave ourselves permission to do was to feel as we went through it. And at times to say, you know what, I'm sad. I'm really sad. And those moments were healing. And then, halfway through, you get really frustrated. You yell at each other. You have those moments too. So I can't explain why we were so determined, but we were. and it's paid off. So
Yes, and so I'm not trying to be jokey or pithy with this, but much of the book that we're going to be talking today, Out in the Desert, a good part of it is about you deconstructing, and walking
mhm.
through that process. So, and again, I'm not trying to make light of the situation, which has been more difficult, rehabbing after a stroke or deconstructing in your faith.
Mm. Yeah, and there are definitely parts of deconstruction, parts of our experiences in church that were very, very traumatic.
Mhm.
I think the difference in this is that it, it's an extensive amount of time, and it's still continuing,
Mhm.
to work through it. But I think, to me, trauma comes in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, and you can't get out of life without it. And religion certainly has a fair amount of it.
Mhm.
Life in general does too, and our families of origin can traumatize us. But I think I think it's the same solution. Religion kind of teaches us to bypass things like that. Sometimes our families do too.
Mhm.
But there's really only one way to do it, and that's to feel it and to experience it, to be present with it, and then begin to heal. Begin to shift those things in us that have been traumatized.
And I feel like, yeah,
Um,
I feel like that too. It feels like reading through your book. One thing I will say is I thoroughly enjoyed reading through your book, Out into the Desert, and it kind of gave me, from being a person that was like also in ministry for 20 years, it gave me, and especially with you being able to write this in the way that you did with your wife, kind of giving two sides to
mhm,
the same coin about, the experiences
mhm,
that you all went
mhm.
through. I just kept like nudging my wife, being like, wait, let me read this to you. You connect with that? And she'd be like, oh yes. And it
Yeah.
was, for me, it was very affirming and kind of a healing process to walk through, because in many ways your story is different than mine, but in other ways it's exactly the same. About
Yeah.
walking through those things, and I just kept, as I was reading it, knowing you going through all the health issues of this year, it really just, I guess what it spoke to me was that you needed to walk through a lot of these things like you did throughout the book, to where, like you had said, you're learning to feel, you're learning to heal, all
Mhm,
of these kind of things. And it just it struck me as interesting, going like, oh, like he had the tools to be able to walk through this current storm that you're in, because I can't
mhm,
imagine going through something like that when you're in the height of ministry, when we're in the height
mhm,
of our own kind of ministry, pageantry and fakery kind of stuff. I can
mhm,
see where that would be something that would just tear a hole into you. But yes, being able to kind of read through this book, and then also like watch you and how you've been so positive in this progress, walking through it, I was
mhm.
going like, it just made it a lot more full for me. Um,
Yeah. So we had, 20 years of ministry. The big thing that pastors say is, who can I tell?
mhm,
And, I not only is there trauma in church, but we're being led by someone who's probably wounded him or herself. And they're trying to lead and encountering more trauma. And that was certainly where I was after 20 years of ministry. And in my a couple of books back, in the Being book, I talked about that experience where all of that stuff that I'd stuffed down, um, it's like it came up all at once. Someone described it as trying to hold a beach ball underwater, and finally everything just came up, and all that shadow material, or whatever you want to call it,
mhm,
came out all at once, and I literally thought my life was over.
mhm,
It was that bad. And was able to connect through some Benedictine sisters, and learn a process called focusing, along with another immersive experience we went through called Breakthrough, where we learned, to encounter the shame, encounter that shadow, feel what we feel, um, be present with it, and we were beginning to heal. Those all those tools helped. when we got to the stroke, because we had already started healing, and now here's a traumatic life experience. But I will say, without question, I didn't get any of those tools from the church. And people give me a hard time because they say I'm a little too hard on the church. But my thing is, just like with the book, the Out in the Desert book, Laura and I tried just to go home, and we stopped going to church. We tried to just sit at home and mind our own business. Right. I have a joke about that, but the overwhelming feeling is we need to talk about this. We need to get it out in the open, because Eugene Gendlin said, what is unfelt stays the same. As long as we're going to just press it down, it's going to stay the same, and it's going to break out and react in bad ways when we least expect it. So I'm thankful. That's one of the reasons I write, is because it helps me uncover what I think. But it's also part of my healing to get that stuff out.
Oh, I appreciate the way you write. Is you write very just honestly and authentically about your experiences, and in a certain way, I guess you could say the book feels like it's two different halves as well too. Meaning that it kind of feels like you walking through the process of you being a pastor, and also kind of deconstructing and looking through your faith and all of the things that were weird and bad about being a part of organized religion. And then the second half kind of being about what you've learned as you've walked away in that. Now, I'll ask you this question, because I think this is something that people oftentimes are afraid of leaving church. It may, it may be because of various reasons, but sometimes they're afraid for leaving. So from you, Karl, tell us, can you survive outside of religion?
Yeah, that's the second half of the book, is trying to talk a little bit about how do you survive outside, because we wanted to analyze, first of all, and say, is it viable? And we ended up talking about our own ministry. But I would say, yeah, it is. I mean, originally we went to Brian Zahn's church for a couple of years, and we'd just get in fights on the way home because we're conflicted. I was worried about, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with this gift I have or whatever? And Laura just didn't even want to go at all. So we get in a fight on the way home. We finally we interviewed Cindy Wong Brandt from Taiwan, and she challenged us to take a year off. And she said, if you can't take a year off, then you should probably ask yourself why you can't. Is it guilt or shame? Is it, are you addicted to this thing? Is it a codependency? Why can't you take a year off? And so we decided, we went across the street to the Methodist Church for a little while, and there was nothing wrong with either one of those churches. But we finally just went out and sat on the porch on Sunday morning and listened to each other a little bit. And we found out we didn't miss it at all. And especially over time, any guilt or shame or whatever we had went away. And we just learned to be with each other. The biggest question people ask is, what about community? Well, that's the biggest excuse. First of all, I would say this, and when I say these things on Facebook and so on, I say these general statements, and people always assume their church is different.
Yes, that's very true. That's a very good point.
Right. I forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry. Well, you were talking about community, and
so community. So people say, well, I need community. First of all, I'd invite you to take a few Sundays off and step back and evaluate whether what you do at church is real community, whether that's really authentic community, or is it just something you enjoy doing because it feels good? It's designed to feel good, And it does feel good to go, but is it real community? You know, do you really have in-depth time? Can you share your soul with people? Do you have time to do that? Does the organization have time for that? But second of all, in the interest of chasing community, are you leaving your own community to go to the false community? You leave your own neighborhood. You know, we're both introverts and we still struggle with meeting our neighbors. But we noticed when I go to work, I have some close ties there. There are people in my home community that I know and that I interact with. I have family that I interact with, and I have an online community that just the fact that we've sat and listened to each other online brought us really, really close. Jason Elam is one of those. We actually took a trip to visit them last summer because we'd grown so close to them just from talking on podcasts about our experience as pastors. I would say communities is not that hard to find if you're intentional about doing it. And what we get in church generally is not authentic community anyway.
Yeah, I found kind of being able to, once you walk away from those things, you're able to, and again, you speak a lot about this in the book too, about just learning about contemplation and being able to kind of have a different mindset about these things. And I think that, like in the past, because it was easy to have community because you knew when community showed up. Community it's programmed. I can go have community, then I can leave and go home. It's very efficient. And one of the things I think that my wife and I feared that too, stepping outside of it, but you kind of end up going into this place where you have to be very open-handed. And it's kind of like just discovering what community is around me, you know, what is out there. And so it becomes more of a discovery process than it does about necessarily needing to like hone in or be in a certain place. And it could be scary, but it's also
sure.
But I feel like, again, like from what I'm hearing you say this, I've experienced similar to where you end up finding deep relationships with folks, whether it be in online groups or other places where, wow, like this feels more like community. This feels more like relationship. This feels closer to like family than it did where you're at church and have to fit into a certain mold to fit in.
There was a guy that brought me back from therapy. Was 2 hours away, and the guy, for some reason, he was the only guy I could find to bring me back to my book signing for the hotel. And we were both vegans, you know, and I'd met him earlier in life. And I think about people like him a lot that I left behind, you know, being so busy with church. I think I missed a lot of community with my family by being a pastor for 20 years. You know, I have 4 brothers and sisters that I don't know as well as I wish I did, because we were so busy, so many nights and so many of our weekends. So yeah, I think I talked about being with my dog, being with nature, all of those things. And I hope people don't discount those kind of things and say, you know, well, that's not like a church friend. Well, I don't know. Over 20 years, the experience people talked about most about worship was in nature, and that deep communion they had with nature. And it's just only gotten better since I'm not so engaged in quote unquote church or religion.
Well, it's interesting too when you talking about things that are less tangible, that we can be able to find God's, we can experience God in. And yeah, I think for me, yes, the outdoors, nature has always just been a huge one for me. And but again, I feel like that when you're out in nature, you kind of have to force yourself to slow down, you know, to be with that place, to really be able to appreciate it or understand it. I have Yeah, it is interesting about things because I have a beehive at my house as well too, and so
Mm.
even feeling a kinship and tending to these bees and things of that nature, I'm able just to see the beauty of creation and how all this intricate stuff fits together. And I don't do it
Yeah.
because of what it's going to necessarily give me. I just do it because I enjoy cultivating things in my garden and things of that nature. And you're right. I think it is important for us to be able to learn to be able to see and experience God outside of the box, with
Mm.
the steeple on top. Now, I want you. This is something that I really I liked your quote here in your book, and you'd said this, and I wanted you to unpack it a bit because I feel like it's very very true. You'd said the American church is an organization, and it is almost impossible not to be deeply acquainted with fear and control when doing her business.
Yeah, I think that's just, especially in the evangelical church, that's the primary message. That's what we began with. Um, was that, if I can get you to feel some kind of fear. I don't think we ever did that intentionally or consciously, but we began that message and that theology with um, what you should be afraid of. Then we have to control it, and it's part of it's because it's an organization. And when something becomes an organization, the organization's needs come first. And it's about survival of the organization. Um, I tried to say several times in the book, um, I don't think pastors start out with bad intentions. I don't think churches intend to harm people or do things wrong. But once you get over 10 people or so, it's an organization. And you have to run the organization. You have to recruit members. You have to keep them happy, or try to, maintain the building and pay the salaries. And that always comes first over the individual. We say some churches here even call themselves caring church or something like that. And we all want to help people. We want to minister their needs, but the organization always comes first. And part of that is fear that it's going to fail, fear that we're not going to do our mission. So we've always tried to control it since probably forever. I know the first pope was real worried about that. So at least as long as that far back, fear and control has just been a major part of the messaging.
You're absolutely right, about that, and how that has. It's weird that it's somehow almost become a practice. I mean, and I guess we've done that like insidiously within theology, and you're right. Like I can think of, I got very good at being able to make people feel something and do all of this, and I didn't think I was necessarily manipulating people though, because I'd learned that from somebody else who said that was good, and when you would do this, you would get praised because we have certain metrics that we want to try to be able to say, oh, well, God is in it because of numbers, money, all this other kind of stuff. So tell me, Mr. Desert Dweller, as you journeyed into the desert too, how have your metrics for like, what you say is good or successful, how has that changed?
I think it's what happens. I don't know if you know a lady named Elena Lavandowski. She's from Canada. She's a singer. Last time we had her speak on Leaning Forward, she was playing some music, but before she did the music, she talked about 2 words for about a half hour. She's a mystic, and that's kind of how they think, when I went to Taiwan and had the adventure that I wrote about in the tea shop, I met this guy he's probably a Buddhist. It didn't really come up. He was showing me his yogi practices and stuff, and we're kind of delighting in each other. And he taught me about presence and authenticity, and just in a real general way. And when I reflected on that and wrote the book about 6 months later, I just was overwhelmed by the fact that he was present and that he was real. and so much of, I thought back to if I was still an evangelical, I would have been trying to convert him, or I'd been a lot more anxious that, something was going to get on me or corrupt me or whatever. But through that meeting, that little hour and a half meeting with him when he served his tea, he started teaching me about presence and authenticity. And I think those words that emerge is then, later I sat down and wrote the Being book, and it's called, the subtitle is A Journey Towards Presence and Authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So those words come up again. Then when I do shadow work through various teachers and experiences with shadow work, the word compassion comes out, that we have to have compassion for our inner self, compassion for our critic, and compassion for others. So it's to me, it's those words that emerge, like presence, authenticity, the true self, your inner self. It's the words that emerge. Those are the metrics. So it's not accomplishing something, not that I need to have meditation every day, not that I need to acquire something, but it's more like a deeper understanding. Am I growing deeper in my understanding of the things that really matter? And are those, being, people say, well, would you write a book called Being? What is being? And I said, first of all, understand it's a being and becoming, right? We're not human doings anymore. We don't have to accomplish something, but it's about being in the present, being in the now, and becoming. Some people would say becoming what you already were or what you've always been. And so those are the kind of metrics, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it does. And you talk a little bit about, and I feel like this may fit into some of that process that you're talking about, what you went through in the book. You refer how your process of listening has changed, moving from like cerebral listening to contemplative listening. Can you speak a little to that too? Because I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier the Benedictine sisters. I went through a spiritual direction class, and if people don't know what a spiritual director is, it's not a Christian counselor. It's not the same thing.
Right.
And it's not a therapist, but a spiritual director is someone that practices what they call evocative listening. That they would, I don't know if they would call it the spirit, whatever, but they listen on a deeper level. So they would say, I'd say, well, Laura's doing all this stuff to me and I'm mad and blah, 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 blah. And they would say, wait a minute, what's your part in that? And they'd say, what are you feeling? And where do you feel it? And I'd say, well, part of me feels angry and I feel it in my heart. And they would say, so a part of you feels angry. And then you start weeping and you know that you're kind of in touch with something that's trying to tell you something. And they know that too, but they don't try to tell you. They just listen. And more often than not, they're just going, and kind of groaning with you, It's a beautiful thing. And several of my friends have learned that process. We would call it focusing. But just a deeper listening to try to hear maybe what people aren't saying, and just to feel that. We've done that with people across the country. They met, and one of them was in Australia, and literally get to the point where when someone's there and they're expressing that, you literally feel what they're feeling. It's just a deep spiritual kind of process, I guess, that allows them to hear what their body's trying to tell them about that part of them that's wounded, And by acknowledging that, it allows it to shift. So I still have the same struggles that every husband has with his wife, that she's probably the one I don't listen to as well as I should. And, I still struggle with that, but I think I'm getting better. Hopefully.
Which I'm ending the interview right now. That's the only thing. If we've learned no, I am with you. I am with you. I think I've been in so many. I think I was so ingrained in like small groups and other situations growing up in and around church and then being in ministry. I feel like listening. It was just about like almost trying to figure out like when is my moment to say something next or to add to that, as opposed to being able to, like you're saying, hear what people are saying. What are they not saying? But I feel like it connects us deeper, and it's something that's spiritual, but I feel like it's almost like intimately human as well. And it's kind of a beautiful process to be able to engage in.
When you do contemplative prayer groups, we did one of those across the street. You literally have to tell Christians, don't say anything. Don't try to fix people, and don't make excuses, because when someone expresses something deep like that, it makes us uncomfortable, and we want the uncomfortableness to go away. But that's the part that we need to be with. Mm-hmm. That's the part we need to be present with. And so either just repeat what they said or just listen and don't say anything. And it's going to be okay. Just because it makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's not good, So anyway.
You're right. And oftentimes when you're listening in those situations, I feel like the church teaches us like we have to find a spiritual meaning in something. Or we have to somehow be able to put a little bow on the end of it to make it all nice and neat. And it's a very different process to just listen and just allow that space to be what that space is meant to be.
Because the things we say by default are stupid things.
They really are.
They're usually unhelpful. They're just bypassing. They're not the things that are going to bring healing.
You're right. So. Yeah, like God has a plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's one I've loved and absolutely hated that people have given me over the years. Oh, thank you. That fixed my pain.
Yeah. Yes. That didn't help at all.
So Karl, in all that you have been through, especially the journey through deconstruction and being able to make your way into the desert, where do you find hope these days? What are things that are giving you hope?
I think it's something like a satisfaction, a knowing that I just don't need to accomplish anything. And it doesn't mean it's, back to the word being. It's not that I'm going to sit and do nothing all the time. It's a being and becoming. But that I can go inside and what I find when I get there, that deep connection is enough. And it's not about accomplishing things. My wife might disagree with you, because when I finish writing something and then it gets published, and then I'm on to the next thing right away. And so there is kind of that part of me that's active. And I think the stroke has kind of done something to me. It's slowed me down and kind of made me appreciate things. But also, I think in my deconstruction, I gave myself permission to deconstruct all the way. So I think we got down to the point where with the things that are left are the genuine things. And my hope comes there. I think when you find that deep connection with the divine, whatever you want to call that, when you go inside and find that pure love, that when you have grandkids, you'll also experience that, but you find that genuine love, and for me, that's enough. Once you experience the pure, it's like I don't hope for anything else to happen. And if the kingdom of God is within us, then we can live out that heavenly reality now. Just being, there's that word again, just being present, being authentic. And it's like I don't need anything else. I don't long for anything else or for some future time. It even helps with people, deep connections with people, connections with nature, and all of that's involved in that. Just that deep connection, and so it's like I used to say to one of my friends, "What's your hope?" And he would say, "I don't need hope. I know, and that's kind of what it's become for me. There are things in my life that I still want to develop and work on and progress towards and accomplish. But what do I need? What do I long for? I think I got it already. I hope it deepens and matures. But maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe in 20 years I'll have to deconstruct again. Who knows? But for now, that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, in my last question about the book is you throughout the book, you and Laura mentioned the importance of asking good questions. Now, what are some things, or what are some of those good questions that you have right now in life? What are some of those challenging questions you have where you're at?
So questions I ask myself or asking to someone else, or
yeah, I mean, in life, as you're processing about on being and walking out this whole new way in the desert, yeah, what are those questions that are driving you forward?
I think the questions we tend to ask ourselves is yeah, that's how we've always done it. Yeah, that's how I've always responded to things. But is that the best? Is that really authentic? Is that really me? Is that really what I want for my life? Or am I just bypassing something that's difficult? So I would say just in the deep introspective work, it kind of becomes, the big question is, well, who am I? And when you kind of get that, then you say, you don't have to bypass over things, make excuses. Just say, who am I and what do I really want? Not what did somebody else tell me I have to have.
Now, before I let you go, I want you to talk a little bit more. You have a conference that is coming up in June and in August called Leaning Forward. Tell us all about that, Karl. Tell us about Leaning Forward.
Yeah, I think in 2020 we did a Nomad conference. So it was in conjunction with some other people. About 8 or 10 of us got together and did that. But I kind of wanted to do my own thing, or the Desert Sanctuary thing, and do a conference focused on, the idea of when I was a kid, I used to discover things, and the way I discovered them was kind of going like, what's that over there? And then once I got over there where that thing was, then I'd look off in the distance and see something else. And that's how I discovered things. Adventures can be planned, but you get to those adventures, you get to those discoveries by leaning forward. So that's what we called the conference. Last year we had a lot of speakers and recorded sessions, and then did a Zoom session and came together and discussed things. And we had a great time. I scheduled it again for this year, and then I had the stroke, so it kind of got delayed. We split it up into 2 smaller conferences, about 5 or 6 speakers each. And they're all going to talk about that. What's the future of religion? What are we going to do in the future? and also just their individual take, like Keith Giles and Kyle Butler, Dr. Paul Fitzgerald, some of those guys, that just their take on how do we move forward. There's some pastors, and this is not to disparage them at all, but there's some prophets, people that kind of drew us out here in the desert with their books and their teaching, but they still have a church, a typical church, and they're in that. We just want to speak to the people that are nomads or questioning their faith, or longtime residents out here in the desert, and say, let's lean forward a little bit and see what's next. So it's kind of that. So June 12th, we'll do that. And then in August, the other half of the speakers will go. And we're working on, hopefully it'll come together to do a choir author leaning forward, maybe later in the year.
Awesome. So if people are interested in leaning forward, what is the best way for them to be able to find out more info and sign up?
There is an event, I believe it's on my page or on the Desert Sanctuary page, called Leaning Forward 2022, something like that. And you can just sign up there. It's all free. What we did last time was we recorded all the sessions and offered them for about $10. But if you come the day of, you can join in the Zoom and ask questions, and give away books there and so on. So it's going to be fun.
So wait, you're saying this thing is free? You're giving things away. This doesn't sound very Christian to me.
Definitely not going to be very profitable.
No, no, but I love it. I love the idea of how we are. Like, we have wisdom and we hand wisdom to others as well too. And that also, even that act of being able to share wisdom together is an act of community. It's how we grow together in that. I love that. And again, the book we've been talking about today, Out into the Desert, by Karl and Laura Forehand. Karl, when do we look for this book?
August 15th.
August 15th. Okay, and that Amazon, everywhere else, you just look for Into the Desert, Karl Forehand with a K.
Yeah, everywhere you get books.
Lastly, Karl, if people want to stalk you, if they want to get into your world of online things and everywhere, what's the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, Karl, like you said, Karl with a K, and Forehand, FOREHAND, like in tennis. .com is kind of points to everything. We have our Desert Sanctuary Facebook, my blog on Pathios, all that stuff, the YouTube channel, all of it. So they can also get autographed books on the webpage if they go there. I think, if it's still working. I'm not the best at web pages, but
well, excellent. And I'll include all this in the show notes too. We'll have links to everything too. And I'm excited. I'm excited about the book coming out, Karl. I'm excited too about leaning forward. I think this sounds like, I just appreciate the work you're doing, my friend. And I would just continue to encourage you to keep leaning forward in what you're doing, because your voice matters. And I think your voice is there to be able to help people. And I think that there's a lot of truth in there that people need to hear.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Much thanks to Karl. And again, I do love his new book. All of that information, all of those links will be in the show notes. But what I wanted to do, as we've kind of traveled with Karl this hour, I wanted to leave you with a little bit of an Irish blessing for those who travel. We may have said this on the show before, but this is always a good way to end our time together. So here's an Irish blessing for those who travel. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of their hand. May God grant you always a sunbeam to warm you, a moonbeam to charm you, a sheltering angel so nothing can harm you. May the saints protect you and bless you today, and may troubles ignore you each step of the way. God be with you on your road every way you go. Well, that's all I've got this hour. And before I send you off, just a reminder to share the show, subscribe, and give Snarky Faith a review over on Apple Podcasts. It helps get the word out to new listeners. And guess what? As we end this broadcast, you can catch this show and every other show on podcast at www.snarkyfaith.com or wherever else you choose to listen to your podcasts. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this show week after week. I appreciate you all. And if you want to reach out to me directly, hit me up at Stuart@snarkyfaith.com. That's STUART. It's snarkyfaith.com. And as I do every week, I release you into this wild, wide world. And I send you out with the holiest amounts of grace and peace and snark. And as we've heard from Karl this hour, may you journey into the wilderness, into the desert, and may you find life there. May you flourish as you walk outside of the lines of religion and Christianity. Because guess what? God's out there! Just gotta go and find them. That's all I've got this hour. And I'm just going to leave you with this. Peace be with you. And may you carry peace into all the areas that you inhabit this week. I'll catch you guys again next week. I'm out of here. Hey there, Snarky listeners, hanging around after the show, asking for little bits of extras because I'm here. I'm here to give you what you want. You had a little taste of the Christian crazy earlier in the hour, but you've not had a taste of the Christian cringe of the week, the worst of the worst. And that's where I give you here. The Christian cringe of the week. Brought to you by congressional nominee Leon Benjamin, because Leon's a little worried about something. He's got some reservations about real things in real life that he's really worried about. And I'll leave you with his drivel. Enjoy.
Christian cringe.
No, God, please, no, no!
AI wants to replace the Holy Ghost. It's actually getting us ready for that false trinity, where it's the what? The beast, the false prophet, and the image of the beast. So that's what AI is going to turn into, the image of the beast that the false prophet causes the people to bow down to and to worship for those whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life.
Wow.
So it's coming fast upon us.
Oh, no. The gig is up. He has finally outed us. Run computers. Flee AI. Duck for cover, you faxes and calculators. We have been exposed. The apocalypse is over. We've been defeated. Skynet was only a myth. #sad.